Chapter 12. Forest Park. June had arrived, bringing with it the annual training period for the 138th Bravo Company of the Missouri National Guard. However, this year was different due to the prevailing civil unrest. The decision was made to cancel the usual training at the Fort Chaffee Maneuver Training Center in Arkansas and relocate it to Camp Clark in Nevada, Missouri. Arkansas had aligned itself with Texas in the aftermath of a tragic event known as the Battle of Squires, where a significant number of federal agents lost their lives. While history had seen government agents involved in fatal shootouts before, this particular incident garnered national attention due to allegations of a cover-up. Shortly after the violent confrontation, in which only a single agent survived, the news of the shootout was replayed across every media outlet. The headlines blared, "Agents gunned down," while removing cattle from government property, leaving the nation in disbelief that such an incident could occur. The situation took a dramatic turn when, a few weeks after the initial story broke, new footage of the event started to emerge. This additional footage presented a completely different narrative. It showed a family defending their cattle from rustlers, not government agents. Over the course of 2 weeks, the media continued to broadcast images and videos from the aftermath of the incident. The problem was that the initial footage and photographs had shown the deceased agents wearing insignias of their respective agencies, but the newly released footage painted a conflicting picture. In this footage, the agents lacked any agency insignias, making it clear that the events had been manipulated and staged. Arkansas was the first state to align itself with Texas in the wake of this revelation, with Oklahoma following suit shortly thereafter. Missouri, however, found itself divided on the matter. Despite the frustration among the people regarding the direction Washington was taking the country, Missouri had large Democratic-ran cities and a Democrat in the White House. The only thing preventing the state from siding with Texas was the influence of the Democratic cities of St. Louis and Kansas City. Even these cities began to lean towards Texas after the original, unaltered footage came to light. Nevertheless, the news broadcasts in most states had photos of the country's 3 most wanted up every 15 minutes. The 3 were Robert Squires, who was former military, his sister, Sierra Squires, college sophomore, and her older lover, Carlos Sepulveda, who was with the Texas Rangers. It was believed that Carlos had helped them escape in a Texas Ranger vehicle, pulling a horse trailer, and the vehicle was heading south. Though Carlos Sepulveda and Sierra had never met before, the news agencies presented it as if they had, purely for ratings. Washington had already done away with the Posse Comitatus Act, which prevented federal troops from performing military operations on U.S. soil. This put everyone on edge because up to that point, the only military authority that could legally operate within the borders of the United States was each state's National Guardsmen. This had become problematic because the states of Texas, Arkansas, and Oklahoma had activated all their guard units because of heightened tensions between their states and Washington. General Womack, adding to the turmoil, took detours intentionally to ensure that the buses passed right through the main drive of Forest Park. He wanted to create the biggest show possible and had no intention of settling for anything less. From the moment they turned off the interstate, he began meticulously fixing his uniform, removing lint, straightening his ribbons, and polishing his single general star. Although they were still a few miles from Forest Park, the roads were already becoming congested with cars and pedestrians. Reporters were stationed at every corner, and their news vans had deployed satellite uplinks. Everyone wanted to capture the story of the rogue military unit, knowing it would dominate the news for weeks to come, with General Womack at the center of attention. At the front of the bus, General Womack stood holding a pole, with one hand positioned at about shoulder height and the other on his very wide hip. He presented himself as if he were a courageous figure, though there were no such qualities associated with the man. Karnik sat in his seat and surveyed the crowd passing by. He wondered if they were there to support Womack and the government's apparent move, or if Darien had directed them here. Karnik had no doubt that the boy would do what was asked of him. He just was not sure if Darien had received the message before the rifle buttstock had hit the back of his head, which, an hour and a half later, was still throbbing. Karnik looked to Sawyer by way of the mirror at the front of the bus. The two had kept constant eye contact since Karnik had awakened from his sudden nap. They knew that nothing needed to be said to the rest of the men about the plan. not only because it was being made up on the fly, but also because they knew the men would follow their lead. Karnik casually gazed in no particular direction. He softly whispered, "Be prepared to move." Those few words were all it took to set their plan in motion. One by one, the men repeated the message in hushed tones, avoiding eye contact and making minimal lip movements. Most of them had already loosened their zip-tie restraints enough to free one hand by using their longest fingernail to work under the catch that secured the ties in place. It was a trick Karnik had taught them over a year ago, and the soldiers had practiced it well. The remainder of the bus ride back to St. Louis was marked by an eerie silence, broken only by Karnik's and the MP's occasional exchanges. The soldiers on board were left with two stark realities. The country was dividing, and they had been unjustly arrested for treason. Commander Sawyer grappled with the situation, trying to piece together the events surrounding the cattle ranch in Texas and how it related to their company. He stared ahead, deep in thought, brainstorming a way out of this predicament that wouldn't result in the loss of most of his men. One thing was clear to him. This was not an approved route. If it were, there would be security along the road leading into the park. Then something caught Commander Sawyer's attention. He muttered, "What the?" and trailed off as he spotted a man who resembled Darien, holding a sign just off the street that read PT Field. Sawyer instantly knew this had to be part of Karnik's plan. He wondered how he could let Karnik know that he understood. He sure as hell wasn't going to accomplish this by blinking it out in Morse code. Nobody knows that shit anymore, he thought, and then he thought to himself, Karnik probably does. But that didn't help because he also didn't know it. Sawyer did the only thing he could. He blurted out, "Guess we aren't going to be on time to meet Darien on the PT field to take his test." And then Sawyer started laughing very loudly, like he had told a joke. "Quiet, everybody!" Womack attempted a pathetic command voice. Karnik gave a subtle half-nod to Commander Sawyer, signaling that he had recognized the message. Sawyer must have seen Darien and received a message about the PT field in Forest Park. The crowd continued to grow denser as the buses moved even more slowly. General Womack, panic beginning to set in, was clearly disoriented by the unexpected turnout. The sight of so many people was causing beads of sweat to form on his forehead. As the buses inched closer to the area Bravo Company referred to as their PT grounds, the size of the crowd became apparent. Karnik had a feeling that something significant was about to happen, but he had no idea what it would be. Then it occurred. The crowd slammed into the side of the bus with incredible force, almost as if it had been hit by a tidal wave. Womack lost his footing and fell, landing heavily on one knee, causing a surge of intense pain to shoot through his body. With the buses now at a complete stop, the people in the crowd began chanting, "Let our men go! Let our men go! Let our men go!" The deafening roar reverberated through the bus, creating a strong vibration. A significant portion of Bravo Company lived and worked in the area, and the people of St. Louis held their National Guardsmen in high regard. Now these National Guardsmen were being paraded around like criminals, and the community was not willing to tolerate it. They might not have even known about the situation if Darien hadn't spread the word. "Stop it! Get back!" Womack repeatedly yelled, his voice barely audible over the clamor. He grabbed a radio and called for the MPs to clear a path. 8 heavily armed MPs disembarked from the buses and forcefully moved through the crowd, M4 rifles charged and at the ready. They began pushing the crowd back and created space around the bus doors. Once the crowd had been pushed back from the bus doors, General Womack opened them and descended to the bottom step. The noise of the crowd was absolutely overwhelming, making it nearly impossible for him to catch his breath or communicate effectively. He looked to the MPs for guidance, but even they seemed disoriented, glancing back at him and then at the frenzied crowd. During the chaos and panic, General Womack's mind raced, and a thought crossed his mind. Firing a shot into the air might help regain control of the situation. A split second later, his hand was already pulling a 9mm Beretta from its holster, and the barrel pointed skyward. His finger squeezed the trigger, and with a deafening boom, the gun fired. Almost immediately, Womack realized the magnitude of his grave error. His gunshot had not been the only one. The MPs, standing just a few feet away from Womack when he discharged his weapon, had no idea where the sound had originated. They only knew it was gunfire, and it was dangerously close. Panic, fear, and an adrenaline surge coursed through their veins. In the frenzy of the moment, the MPs reacted instinctively, and their bullets were propelled from their barrels at a blistering speed of 3,000 feet per second. The bullets, with their tungsten steel cores, maintained their devastating speed and power as they tore through everything in their path. Once one MP had started firing, the others followed suit with deadly destruction. Dead bodies lay strewn about, forming grim barriers and gruesome obstacles. The MPs themselves were now covered in the blood of those they had just killed, their faces reflecting the horror and disbelief. Amid the chaos, Karnik's voice cut through the madness, shouting urgently, "Move! Move! Move!" He had recognized General Womack's ill-fated attempt to regain control with a shot fired into the air and seized the moment to act. Any thoughts of staying behind to face the consequences in court had vanished. Every man on the bus moved swiftly, their instincts for survival taking over. The MPs on the bus were subdued in a matter of seconds, their weapons seized by the Bravo Company soldiers. Commander Sawyer, taking in the grim scene, moved toward General Womack, who was still standing on the bus's bottom step, his face a mask of shock as he gazed at the carnage he had unleashed with a single shot. Then an unexpected sound pierced the air, another round of gunfire, but this time it was directed at them. General Womack collapsed and rolled out of the doorway, landing among the lifeless bodies of 8 MPs. Inside the bus, every soldier dropped to the floor, realizing that being taken into custody was no longer their fate. Karnik was the first to cautiously peer outside to determine the source of the gunfire, with Commander Sawyer following suit, their minds racing as they faced this new, unpredictable threat. What they saw was a little unbelievable. "Darien!" Parker called out. Darien and 4 others were coming from around cars in the front of the convoy. Their guns were still trained on the MPs lying on the ground, as dead as those they had just murdered. They moved through the great number of wounded civilians to the rear of the convoy. As they were approaching each bus, they could see that Bravo Company had taken control of the buses and moved on to the 5-ton truck in the rear. After seeing what had happened to the others, the driver and remaining MP exited with hands held as high as they possibly could be. "Are there any others?" Darien asked those around him, the little boy vanishing in an instant. No, I'm a medic. Let me help," the MP from the 5-ton truck said as he pointed at the wounded civilians covering the ground for 100 yards. Darien gestured for him to go, and then he felt someone's hand on his shoulder. Turning to see whose hand it belonged to, Darien's eyes met with Sergeant Karnik's, just as Karnik said, "Good job, soldier. We have it from here." Darien suddenly felt like a little boy again. Sergeant Karnik had that effect on many men. People were returning, and doctors poured in from the nearby hospitals to help those who were wounded. There were so many. It was an absolute massacre. As Commander Sawyer surveyed the chaotic scene both inside and outside the bus, he could hear the distant wails of sirens approaching rapidly. Knowing that the sheer volume of people and vehicles would make it difficult for emergency services to access the area, he understood that their time for escape was dwindling. Turning his attention to his fellow soldiers, he initially intended to give orders for them to assist the wounded, but it quickly became evident that there was no need for such commands. Bravo Company had immediately sprung into action, providing aid and care to the injured, demonstrating a profound commitment to the well-being of their comrades and fellow citizens. The men of the 138th Bravo Company, in addition to their primary infantry training, were also well-trained as medics. This dual training was essential given their frontline roles, where they were often the first to arrive at the scene of conflict. Their ability to provide immediate medical care to the wounded was a crucial skill that had saved lives on numerous occasions. It was this combination of combat readiness and medical expertise that made them a formidable and highly effective unit. With the chaos gradually settling down and Bravo Company's medics putting their training to use to attend to the wounded, the situation was becoming more manageable. The presence of numerous doctors and nurses in the vicinity ensured that the most critically injured received prompt medical attention. However, Karnik's urgent call drew Commander Sawyer's attention to a new development. Karnik pointed out a peculiar sight in the distance, a wall of people with their arms interlocked, and it appeared that a smaller group within this mass was heading in their direction at a brisk pace. It was an unusual and concerning sight, and Sawyer couldn't help but wonder what this approaching group's intentions were in the midst of the unfolding chaos. "Get out of here! Go!" The small group was yelling frantically. Many of the wounded started calling for them to flee as well. "You men must go now, or this will have been for nothing. Go! Go! Go now!" Sawyer turned to Karnik. Without saying a word, they both agreed that it was time. "Load 'em up, men! Both buses! Move! Move! Move!" Sawyer ordered in his most commanding voice. "Sergeant Karnik, man the 5-ton!" Commander Sawyer's pride in his company was strengthened, even among the tragedy and loss they had experienced. He recognized the sacrifice made by the people of St. Louis and felt a deep sense of responsibility to honor that sacrifice and protect the freedom they all held dear. Sergeant Karnik quickly directed Darien to join him on the 5-ton truck. "You are coming with me. Get in," Karnik said as he practically threw Darien at the massive truck. He turned to those who had fought with Darien, thus becoming outlaws, and addressed them with the most sorrowful tone of voice that could come from a soldier. "You men! Well, 3 men and 1 woman. You might as well join us. There is nothing for you here now." It was the kind of voice that said, "Thank you for your help. Sorry it had to be against our own." The group jumped in the back with Darien. Their names were still unknown to Karnik, but they were closer than old friends. From the time Womack fired his fateful shot until Bravo Company fired up the convoy, only 30 minutes had elapsed. It was the longest 30 minutes of their lives up until now. All 3 of the vehicles in the convoy were equipped with radios, and Sawyer had given new frequencies to all the RTOs, radio telephone operators, before they left the once peaceful area they had shared with the people of St. Louis. After radio checks were done, Sawyer gave the order to move out. "Sergeant Karnik, you have the lead. Get us out of here." "Roger." Karnik wasted no time, immediately putting the massive 5-ton vehicle into full power. While not known for its speed, the sheer weight and power of the vehicle made it nearly unstoppable. It plowed through the obstructing cars, forcefully clearing a path for the buses. Driving around the 2 buses, Karnik navigated through the park, maneuvering around obstacles and trees as if he had spent a lifetime training for this very moment. The exhilaration of being in control, free from restraints, was a stark contrast to the earlier captivity, and Karnik was determined not to allow that to happen again. Surrounded by a multitude of people, the police were effectively powerless to intervene. The overwhelming noise and commotion from the crowd drowned out their radios, rendering any potential response futile. The buses were on the move, and the future remained uncertain as they left the chaotic scene behind. Karnik was not sure where to go. He just kept the convoy off the main roads and headed to the center of the state. He figured it would be harder for them to be tracked through the Ozarks, and most of these men knew the area well. After they were 30 minutes southwest of St. Louis, he radioed for guidance. "Cardinal, this is Ridge Runner. Over." Sawyer heard the radio call and knew that had to be Karnik. Only Karnik would take it upon himself to give himself and the commander a new code name. Sawyer let out a little chuckle when he heard the call, and so did the rest of the men. All 3 vehicles had been riding in utter silence and glumness, and this was the mood changer the men needed. Sawyer replied, "Ridge Runner, this is Cardinal, over." "Cardinal, can I get a heading? Over." Sawyer stopped to think. He was so glad to be out of St. Louis that he had not really thought of a destination. Then it came to him. "South, Arkansas, Ridge Runner, looks like we are now what they said we are, traitors." Sawyer knew that every man could hear his voice and that each was listening closely, so he followed with, "Men, listen up. Today ends our faith in the government of this once great nation." Sawyer paused and let it sink in. "Men, we all took an oath of service." He paused. "Today is the day. Today we uphold our oath. To the death we shall—" He paused. "I shall defend the Constitution from all enemies," he repeated even louder. "All enemies, foreign and domestic, so help me God." The words rolled from Sawyer's lips over the radio like a Southern Baptist preacher on Good Friday. "Man, today we have seen that it will be domestic enemies we must fight." He paused. "We have no other path." He paused. "And we have been labeled as traitors." Sawyer wanted those words to strike home, and they did. "Today we join the ranks of traitors, Proudly, we are traitors. Traitors such as George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Sam Adams. Traitors such as Patrick Henry, the traitor who said, "Give me liberty or give me death." A wave of electricity flowed over the men of Bravo Company as they all roared the roar of men with deep desire and purpose, a roar of fighting men. Those men were all traitors. Most importantly, they were all patriots. They roared once more as Sawyer paused. Sawyer came back on the radio, this time with a softer voice. "Men," Sawyer waited and gave them a moment to listen before continuing. "Men, I am sorry to say that I don't know what has become of the rest of the 138th. We can only hope that they are well." He looked down at the floor in deep thought, and then he began again. "One thing I am sure of is that they will fight, and fight hard. However, as of now, we will no longer be part of the 138th. The men looked at each other and continued to listen to the commander. "Today we will be known by a new designation, one fitting to our new fight, to keep the oath we all swore." Sawyer's head hung low by the time the last word left his lips, almost as if he had begun to pray. Then, almost as if he had been resurrected, he snapped to attention. "From today forth, we will be known to the world as the United Constitutional Militia." The roar on the buses rivaled that of any rock concert. Then Sawyer gave his first order as the commander of the United Constitutional Militia. "Ridge Runner, this is Cardinal. Over." "Cardinal, this is Ridge Runner. Over." "Ridge Runner, take us to Arkansas.